The rain came down in sheets, a relentless drumming against the tin roof of the old barn. It was a sound Alara usually found soothing, a grey curtain that separated her small, isolated world from the judgment of the town nestled in the valley below. Tonight, though, the storm felt different. It clawed at the walls, a restless, angry thing, mirroring the disquiet in her own soul. A lantern swung from a low-slung beam, casting dancing, distorted shadows that made the familiar shapes of hay bales and old tools seem monstrous. Her mare, Willow, stamped nervously in her stall, her soft whick as a question Alara couldn't answer. "Easy, girl," she murmured, her voice a low thread of sound in the storm's symphony. She ran a hand down Willow's flank, the mare's warmth a small comfort against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. It wasn't just the weather. A feeling of wrongness had been prickling at the back of her neck for the past hour, a low thrum of energy that didn't belong on her quiet patch of land. It was the reason she'd left her small cottage, pulling on her worn boots and grabbing the lantern to check on the animals. She'd done her rounds, the chickens were roosting peacefully, Willow was just spooked by the thunder, and was about to head back inside when a new sound cut through the rain. A low, pained groan. It wasn't animal, not entirely, but it wasn't human either. It was guttural, raw, and full of a pain so profound it made her own scars ache in sympathy. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The woods that bordered her property were deep and old, and the townsfolk told stories, whispers of things that walked on two legs and four, of eyes that glowed in the dark. They were the saints' stories that made them look at her, the solitary healer with her knowledge of herbs and roots, with suspicion. Alara knew some of the stories were true. She'd seen tracks too large to be natural, heard howls that were more than just a wolf's cry to the moon. Her first instinct was to bolt the barn door, retreat to the cottage, and pretend she'd heard nothing. It was the safe thing to do. The smart thing. But the sound came again, weaker this time, ending in a rattling sigh that spoke of a life bleeding out into the damp earth. Compassion, the most dangerous and stubborn of her traits, won out over fear. She was a healer. She couldn't ignore suffering, no matter the source. Holding the lantern high, she followed the sound to the back of the barn, near the old, unused milking stalls. The air grew thick, heavy with the coppery tang of blood and something else, something wild and musky, like ozone after a lightning strike, and the scent of pine needles crushed underfoot. It was a scent that was both intimidating and strangely compelling. And then she saw him. He was enormous. Sprawled in the damp straw was a wolf, but a wolf of impossible size, larger than any she had ever seen or read about. His fur was the color of midnight, matted with mud and dark, sticky blood. One massive shoulder was horrifically mangled, a deep, vicious tear that looked like it had been caused by something far worse than the claws of another animal. A silver-tipped arrow shaft, snapped in two, protruded from his flank. Silver. A hunter's weapon meant for one specific kind of prey. Her breath caught in her throat. A shifter. Every rational thought screamed at her to run. Shifters were territorial, powerful, and dangerous, especially when wounded. The ruling packs were a law unto themselves, their politics a brutal game of dominance she wanted no part of. But as the lantern light fell across his face, his eyes opened. They were the color of molten gold, and in their depths, she didn't see mindless savagery. She saw agony, exhaustion, and a fierce, desperate intelligence that held her rooted to the spot. His head lifted a bare inch from the floor, and a low growl rumbled in his chest, a warning. But it was weak, broken by a shudder of pain that racked his entire body. He was dying. Right here, in her barn. She took a slow, deliberate step back, raising her hands to show they were empty. "I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. I can help." The golden eyes tracked her every move. He didn't believe her. Why would he? He was wounded by Silver, the bane of his kind, likely left for dead by enemies. A human stumbling upon him now would be a threat, or an opportunity to finish the job. But Alara wasn't just any human. The scars on her own back, hidden beneath her tunic, were a testament to the cruelty of powerful men. She knew what it was to be hunted, to be hurt. Looking at this magnificent, broken creature, she saw not a monster, but a reflection of her own fight for survival. She set the lantern down on a nearby crate, its light creating a small, warm circle in the gloom. Moving slowly, deliberately, she went to the small cabinet where she kept her supplies. Poultices, clean linen, willow bark for pain, and the special salve she made for deep wounds, a mix of comfrey, yarrow, and a few other ingredients she kept to herself. She also grabbed a bucket and filled it with fresh water from the rain barrel. When she turned back, he was watching her, his head still resting on the straw, but the tension in his body had escalated. His lips were drawn back from teeth that could snap her arm in two. "This will hurt," she said softly, approaching as one would a terrified horse. "But the silver has to come out. It's poison to you. You know that." His only response was another pained growl, but he didn't lunge. He was too weak. Or maybe, just maybe, that flicker of intelligence in his eyes understood the truth in her words. He was out of options. Kneeling in the straw beside him, the sheer scale of him was overwhelming. The scent of him, that wild, electric smell of power and pine, filled her senses, making her head swim. It called to a primitive, forgotten part of her she didn't know existed. She pushed the feeling down, focusing on the task. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled as she reached for the broken arrow. "I am going to be as quick as I can," she promised. His gaze was locked on hers, a silent, searing challenge. "Do it, then." She took a deep breath, braced herself, and with a swift, strong pull, wrenched the silver-tipped shaft from his flank. A roar of pure agony ripped from his throat, so powerful it shook the very timbers of the barn. Willow shrieked in her stall. The wolf thrashed, his massive head snapping toward her, jaws wide. Alara scrambled back, falling into the hay as instinct took over. For a terrifying second, she thought he would lunge, that she had made a fatal mistake. But his body convulsed, and he collapsed back into the straw, his breath coming in ragged, wheezing gasps. The wound in his side poured fresh, dark blood. She didn't hesitate. Scrambling forward again, she pressed a thick wad of linen against the wound, putting all her weight behind it. "Stay with me," she urged, her voice fierce. "Don't you dare die on me." She worked for what felt like hours, the storm outside a distant echo to the storm of her efforts inside. She cleaned the gash on his shoulder, her fingers gently probing the mangled tissue, her stomach churning at the damage. She stitched it closed with a practiced, steady hand, her healer's focus overriding her fear. She packed the arrow wound with a thick, herb-laced poultice that would draw out the last traces of silver poison and fight infection. All the while, he watched her, his golden eyes never leaving her face. He remained conscious, enduring her touch with a stillness that was more terrifying than any growl. It was the stillness of a predator conserving every last ounce of its strength. Finally, she was done. She washed the blood from her hands and brought him the bucket of water. He was too weak to lift his head, so she cupped the water in her hands, bringing it to his mouth again and again. He drank, his rough tongue lapping against her palms, sending a strange, tingling warmth up her arms. Exhausted, she sat back on her heels. The great wolf's breathing was deeper now, more even. The tension had eased from his body, and his eyes, heavy-lidded, finally drifted shut. She stayed with him, sitting in the straw, the lantern burning low beside her. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and silent. In the quiet of the barn, with this dangerous, magnificent creature sleeping beside her, Alara felt a strange sense of peace. She had looked into the face of a monster and chosen to heal it. She didn't know if she had saved her own life, or signed her own death warrant. But as she watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she wouldn't have done anything differently. She had offered mercy. Now, she could only wait to see if it would be returned. For 2 days, he remained a wolf. Elara moved a cot into the barn, sleeping in fits and starts, her senses on high alert. She changed his dressings, forced water and thin broth down his throat, and spoke to him in low, soothing tones, the way she did with her mare. He never growled at her again. He simply watched, those intelligent golden eyes following her every move, a silent, assessing wait. The raw power emanating from him, even in this weakened state, was a constant presence. It was like living next to a banked furnace, a contained inferno that could blaze to life at any moment. On the third night, something changed. The air in the barn grew thick, charged with an energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. The wolf grew restless, his breathing hitching. He tried to stand, his legs trembling, and let out a low whine of frustration and pain. "Easy," Elara said, rushing to his side. "You're not healed yet. Lie down." He ignored her, pushing himself up again. His gaze locked with hers, and for the first time, she saw something other than pain or assessment. She saw a plea. A desperate, unspoken need. Then, his body began to tremble violently. A guttural cry was torn from his throat as his form began to shift. Elara stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. It was nothing like the graceful, instantaneous transformations in the stories. It was brutal. The sound of bones cracking and reforming, the sickening stretch of muscle and sinew, filled the barn. His massive lupine form contracted, folding in on itself in a grotesque, agonizing display of raw, magical power. She watched in horrified fascination as black fur receded, limbs elongated and reshaped, and the wolf's head morphed into the sharp, defined planes of a human face. He collapsed onto the hay, no longer a wolf, but a man. He was naked, his body a roadmap of corded muscle and old, silvery scars that told a story of countless battles. Even unconscious, he radiated an aura of command, of sheer, untamed power. The wound on his shoulder was a mess of bloody stitches on tanned skin, the gash on his flank a stark red against his hip. His hair was as black as his pelt, long and matted with sweat and dirt. He was breathtakingly, dangerously beautiful. Elara's mind reeled. Tending to a wolf was one thing. A wounded animal, no matter how large or intelligent, was still an animal. But this was a man. A shifter. An alpha, by the sheer force of presence that clung to him like a shroud. And he was naked and vulnerable in her barn. Her fear returned, sharp and cold. She was alone with him. Her past, a dark, shadowy thing she kept locked away, whispered warnings in her ear. Men with power like his took what they wanted. They broke what they couldn't have. But then she looked at his face, slack in the aftermath of the painful shift. A line of strain was etched between his brows, and his lips were pale. He wasn't a monster in that moment. He was just her patient. Taking a shaky breath, she fetched a clean blanket from her cottage, her heart thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She draped it over him, her fingers brushing against the fever-warm skin of his arm. A jolt, like lightning, shot through her at the contact. It was sharp, possessive, and deeply intimate. A spark of recognition that flared in the deepest part of her soul and terrified her more than his fangs ever could. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. The same molten gold, but now set in a human face, they were somehow even more intense. He looked at her, then down at his own hands, flexing them as if reacquainting himself with their form. His gaze swept over the barn, taking in the cot, the discarded bloody linens, the lantern. Finally, his eyes returned to hers. "You," he rasped, his voice a low, gravelly sound that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. An accusation. Elara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "I found you. You were hurt. He pushed himself up onto one elbow, the blanket pooling around his waist. The movement was fluid, filled with a predator's grace, despite the wince of pain that tightened his features. You pulled the silver. It was killing you. His golden eyes narrowed, pinning her in place. You're human. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Why help your natural enemy? Why risk your life for a monster? I'm a healer, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I don't ask who my patients are. I only ask where they hurt. A flicker of something, surprise. Respect, crossed his face before it was shuttered away behind a mask of harsh authority. My name is Kale. Elara. He held her gaze for a long moment, an entire silent conversation passing between them. She felt him probing her defenses, weighing her, judging her. She met his stare without flinching, her own quiet strength a shield against his overwhelming presence. Finally, he gave a short, sharp nod. The ones who did this, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. They will be looking for me. You are not safe here. Not anymore. The protective assertion in his tone both rankled and soothed her. He was a stranger, a creature of immense power, yet his first coherent thought was for her safety. This is my home, she replied, her chin lifting. I don't run. You will, he countered, the certainty in his voice absolute. Because they are not just hunters. They are assassins. And when they find me, they will slaughter anyone who stands in their way. They will burn this place to the ground and you with it. The cold finality of his words chilled her to the bone. This was her sanctuary, the one place in the world she felt safe. And she had invited the danger right into its heart. She looked at Kale, at the raw power coiled in his frame even as he bled onto her floor, and she knew he wasn't exaggerating. He was a man of great importance in his world, important enough to be hunted with silver and left for dead. Important enough to have enemies who would leave no witnesses. Who are you? She whispered. He watched her, his expression unreadable. I am the man you saved, he said, deflecting the question. And now it is my turn to save you. The next few days were a tightrope walk of tension. Kale healed with unnatural speed, the shifter blood in his veins knitting flesh and bone at a rate that defied belief. But he was still weak, his movements stiff, his reserves of power low. He was a king in exile, a caged lion, and the barn felt smaller with every passing hour. He was restless, pacing the length of the space like a sentinel, his golden eyes constantly scanning the tree line, his ears tuned to sounds Elara couldn't hear. He refused to come into her cottage, a silent acknowledgement of the impropriety and the danger. He stayed in the barn, and she brought him food, stews and bread she left on a crate by the door. He ate every scrap, the fuel needed for his phenomenal recovery. They spoke little, but every conversation was charged with unspoken things. She would find him watching her as she tended to willow or gathered herbs from her garden, his gaze intense, possessive. It made her skin prickle and a strange, unwelcome heat pool low in her belly. This was the bond she'd read about in forbidden texts. The fated pool between mates. An ancient, primal magic that recognized its other half. She felt it as a low hum beneath her skin whenever he was near, a magnetic pull toward him that she fought with every fiber of her being. She had built her life on solitude, on the safety of being beholden to no one. This feeling was a cage, and she would not be trapped. Kale felt it too. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened when she got too close to change his dressings, the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides, as if to stop himself from reaching for her. He was an alpha. His instincts would be screaming at him to claim her, to mark her, to pull her into his orbit and protect her. Yet, he held back. He saw the fear in her eyes, the shadow of a past she never spoke of, and he gave her space. It was a gesture of respect so profound it chipped away at her defenses more effectively than any show of force could have. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft rose, she found him standing at the edge of the woods, staring out at the valley. He had found a pair of her late father's old trousers and a worn tunic in a chest, and though they were too small, straining across his broad shoulders, they made him look less like a wild spirit and more like a man. "They are close," he said, without turning. "I can smell them on the wind." 3 of them. Ilara's blood ran cold. "How long do we have?" "Until morning." "Maybe less." He finally turned to face her, his features grim in the fading light. "You need to leave, Ilara. Take your horse and ride west. Don't stop until you reach the sea." "And what about you?" she asked, her voice tight. "You're not strong enough to face 3 of them." "I don't need to be at full strength to kill them," he said, a chillingly calm lethality in his voice. "But the fight will be loud. It will draw attention. Your human neighbors will come to investigate, and the pack will not be far behind. My world will crash down on this place. You cannot be here when it does." She looked at the small cottage, its windows glowing with the warm light of her lamp. She looked at her garden, at Willow grazing peacefully in the pasture. It was all she had. A life she had painstakingly built from the ashes of another. And he was asking her to abandon it. "No," she said, the word quiet but unyielding. Cale took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. The sheer difference in their size was stark. He could have crushed her, yet his voice was low, almost pleading. "Ilara, you don't understand. These are not honorable warriors. They are the butcher's sons, loyal to the usurper, who sits on my father's throne. They will delight in hurting you to get to me." The words tumbled out, and with them, a piece of the truth. My father's throne. The Alpha King. The whispers she'd heard in the market, of a king murdered, his heir vanished, presumed dead. It all clicked into place. She hadn't just saved a random shifter. She had saved the lost prince. Cale, the rightful Alpha King. "All the more reason for you to live," she shot back, her fear warring with a fierce, unexpected surge of protectiveness. "You can't face them alone. Let me help." "How?" he scoffed, a bitter, frustrated sound. "With your herbs and poultices. This is not a battle of medicine. This is a battle of fang and claw." "You don't know what I can do," she said, a spark of anger igniting within her. He saw her as fragile, a human to be sheltered. He didn't see the iron in her spine. "This is my land. I know its secrets. There's an old root cellar under the barn, hidden beneath the floorboards. It's lined with stone and iron, it will mask your scent. You can hide there, let them pass." "Hide?" The word was an insult. He snarled, his eyes flashing gold, the alpha within him rising to the surface, enraged at the very suggestion. "I do not hide. I am the son of Valerus. I meet my enemies head-on. And you'll die," she cried, grabbing his arm, her fear making her reckless. The moment her skin touched his, the world tilted. The bond between them flared, a white-hot current that seared them both. It wasn't just a pull anymore, it was a vision. A flash of fire and screaming, of a silver throne room slick with blood. His pain, his loss, his rage, it flooded her. And he felt hers in return, the cold terror of a child hiding from brutal men, the sting of a whip, the bitter taste of helplessness. He recoiled as if burned, his breath hissing between his teeth. He stared at her, his golden eyes wide with shock and a dawning, horrified understanding. He had seen her past. He knew what she was afraid of, and why. The arrogance vanished from his face, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice broken. Before she could respond, a howl split the night. It was close. Too close. Not a call of the wild, but a hunting cry. A signal. They were here. The cellar, Kale grow, his decision made in an instant. His own survival was secondary now. Hers was all that mattered. Show me. There was no more time for arguments. She led him into the barn, her hands trembling as she pried up the heavy, hay-covered floorboards that concealed the cellar door. The space below was small and dark, smelling of damp earth and iron. "Get in," she ordered. He hesitated, his gaze fixed on her face. "They will question you. They will hurt you." "I'll tell them I saw a wolf and it ran off into the woods," she said, her mind racing. "They have no reason to suspect anything else. They will smell my blood on this place. They will smell me on you," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble. The bond had scented her, marked her as his in a way that any shifter would recognize. A cold dread washed over her. He was right. "There is only one way," he said, his eyes burning into hers. "They will not harm the chosen mate of an alpha king. It is the oldest law." He reached out, his hand hovering just above her shoulder, near the junction of her neck. "Let me mark you. A temporary claim. It will be enough to shield you. They will not dare touch you." She flinched back. A claim mark. The ultimate sign of possession. Everything she had ever feared, everything she had run from, was embodied in that one act. It was a collar, a brand. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. Pain flashed in his eyes, sharp and deep. He understood. He had seen her scars. "I will not force you," he said, his voice raw. "But Alara, they will kill you." Another howl, closer now. They were in the clearing. Panic seized her. It was a choice between two prisons, his mark, or their cruelty. One was a cage of possession, the other a cage of death. She looked into his eyes and saw not lust for power, but desperate protection. He was offering her the only shield he had. "Do it," she choked out, the words tasting like ash. She tilted her head, baring her neck, the ultimate gesture of submission. It felt like a betrayal of everything she was. He cupped her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek in a gesture of infinite tenderness that was completely at odds with the violence of the act he was about to perform. "I swear on my father's blood," he murmured, his lips brushing against her ear, "this is a shield, not a chain. You will always be free. I will die before I let anyone harm you. Including myself." Then, he lowered his head, and his teeth, sharp and suddenly present, grazed her skin. A sharp, stinging pain, and then a flood of warmth, of power, of him, poured into her. It wasn't just a bite, it was an exchange. His strength, his authority, his very essence settling over her like a cloak of shimmering, invisible armor. The world swam, and she leaned against him, her knees weak. He pulled back, his eyes blazing with golden fire. A swirl of intricate lines, like a dark tattoo, now marked the skin of her throat. The scent of Alpha King, undeniable and absolute, now clung to her. "Now get in the cellar," she commanded, her voice shaking but firm. "And do not come out. No matter what you hear." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. He nodded once, a king obeying the command of a healer, and lowered himself into the darkness. She slid the heavy door back into place, covered it with the floorboards, and scattered hay over the top just as the barn door splintered open. 3 large men stood silhouetted against the moonlight. They were built like bulls, their faces cruel and predatory. They moved with the rolling gait of shifters comfortable in their human skin, but always ready to shed it. The one in the lead, a man with a scarred face and dead, pitiless eyes, sniffed the air. "He was here," the man snarled. His eyes landed on Alara, and he smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "And he left his little pet behind." Alara stood her ground, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She could feel Kale's rage and fear vibrating up through the floorboards, a silent, desperate roar from his hiding place. "There was a wolf," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It was injured. I patched it up, and it left hours ago. Headed north, into the mountains. The scarred man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He took a slow step toward her, his eyes raking over her body. A wolf. Oh, we are not looking for a wolf, little healer. We are looking for a prince. He sniffed the air again, his nostrils flaring. His eyes widened, a flicker of confusion and then rage in their depths, as his gaze locked on the mark on her neck. It was still fresh, a dark bloom of power against her skin. What is this? He growled, his smile vanishing. He claimed you. His two companions shifted nervously, their eyes darting from the mark to their leader. They knew the law. To harm the chosen mate of an alpha, especially one of royal blood, was a death sentence. He is gone, Elara repeated, her voice gaining strength from the power thrumming through the mark. You will not find him here. The leader's eyes narrowed to slits. He was caught. He could not touch her without inviting the wrath of the entire shifter world, but his pride and his orders demanded satisfaction. The mark is fresh, he spat. He cannot be far. He is weak. We will find him. He took another step, invading her space, his foul breath washing over her. And when we do, we will bring you his head. You can keep it as a memento of your foolish, dead king. He spun around. Tear this place apart. Find him. His men began to ransack the barn, overturning stalls, throwing aside hay bales. They were getting closer to the cellar. Elara's blood ran cold. She had to create a diversion. A real one. Without thinking, she grabbed the still-burning lantern from its hook. Get out of my home, she screamed, and with all her might, she hurled it at a towering stack of dry hay in the corner. The glass shattered, and the oil-soaked hay erupted in a whoosh of flame. Fire shot up the walls, licking at the dry, ancient timbers of the roof. The men swore, stumbling back from the heat. Smoke and panic filled the barn. The place is going up. Let's go, one of them shouted. The leader stared at Elara, his face a mask of fury in the flickering firelight. This isn't over, he snarled, before turning and fleeing with his men into the night. Elara didn't wait to watch them leave. She scrambled to the cellar door, coughing as smoke filled her lungs, and tore at the floorboards. Kale. Get out. The door flew open and he emerged from the darkness, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes wild with fury and fear for her. He took in the scene at a glance, the raging fire, Elara coughing and gasping for air. He swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing and burst through the back wall of the barn, the wood splintering around them, just as the main roof beam collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. He didn't stop until they were in the cool, damp air of the woods, a safe distance away. He set her down gently, his hands framing her face, his eyes scanning her for any injury. Are you hurt? He demanded, his voice thick with emotion. I'm fine, she coughed, her lungs aching. You foolish, brave, impossible woman, he breathed, pulling her against his chest and holding her tight. You would have burned with it. She sagged against him, the adrenaline leaving her weak and trembling. She could feel the frantic, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. They stood there for a long time, watching her barn, her sanctuary, burn against the night sky. Everything she owned was turning to ash. But she wasn't alone. He pulled back, his golden eyes searching hers in the firelight. They will be back, he said softly. And they will not be so easily deterred. The usurper will send an army next time. What do we do? She whispered, the question encompassing everything. Her lost home, his lost throne, the impossible bond that now tied them together. We stop running, Kale said, his voice ringing with a newfound resolve. He looked not at the fire, but north, toward the heart of the shifter kingdom. I am taking back my throne. And I am not going without my queen. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A declaration. He saw the flicker of her old fear, the instinct to retreat back into her shell. He gently touched the mark on her neck. "This began as a shield," he said, his voice soft, yet impossibly strong. "But it is a promise. I will not be the man who hurt you. I will be the man who heals you. With me, you will not be a possession. You will be a power." She looked from the ashes of her old life to the face of the king, who had been reborn in her barn. The quiet solitude she had cherished was gone forever. In its place was a terrifying, uncertain future, full of war and politics and power. But as she looked into his golden eyes, she saw not a cage, but a partnership. She saw a man who had seen her deepest wounds and had not run. He held out his hand. And after a lifetime of running away, Ilara finally took it.